Lisa sat alone in her small quarters on Harmony 7 that evening. The metal walls felt like they were closing in on her. She had sent her daily report to Earth, but the words felt empty. How do you tell your government that you failed before you really started? She touched the communication panel on her desk. The screen lit up and began connecting to Earth. The signal would take a few seconds to travel the distance between the station and home. When the connection opened, she saw Jake's familiar face and felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Hey there," Jake said with his warm smile. He was sitting in their kitchen back in Denver, wearing the old blue shirt she had bought him for his birthday. Behind him, she could see their 8-year-old daughter, Amy, playing with her toy spaceship on the floor. "It's not going well," Lisa said without waiting for him to ask. "I think I'm going to be coming home earlier than planned." Jake sat down, the coffee mug he was holding. "That bad?" "Worse. These species have been fighting for so long, they don't remember how to do anything else. Every suggestion gets shot down, every compromise gets rejected. They would rather go to war than give up even a small piece of what they want." Amy looked up from her toys and waved at the screen. "Hi, Mommy. Are you making the aliens be friends?" Lisa managed a small smile. "I'm trying, sweetheart, but it's harder than I thought it would be." Jake reached into a jar on the counter and pulled out a chocolate chip cookie. Lisa's grandmother's recipe, the same one she had learned as a child. He took a bite and chewed thoughtfully. "You know what always worked when Amy had problems with her friends?" he said. "What?" "Food. Remember last month when Amy and Ben got into that big fight about the swing set? They were so mad at each other, they wouldn't even look at each other." Amy nodded seriously. "Ben said I was hogging the swings, but I wasn't." "But then what happened?" Jake asked. "You made cookies, and we shared them, and then we weren't mad anymore," Amy said. "Ben said your cookies were the best he ever had." Jake looked back at the screen. "Kids can't stay mad when they're sharing food. Something about eating together makes people remember they're not really enemies." Lisa shook her head. "Jake, these aren't children fighting over playground equipment. These are ancient civilizations with armies and nuclear weapons. Maybe, but they're still people, right? Or beings or whatever. They still eat, don't they?" "Well, yes, but remember what your grandmother used to say? You can't break bread with someone and stay enemies for long." She fed half the neighborhood during the Depression, and she always said food was the best way to make friends. Lisa thought about her grandmother, who had died when she was 15. Grandma Rose had been a small woman with a big heart and a kitchen that always smelled like something wonderful. She had fed anyone who came to her door, and somehow she had made friends with people who had nothing in common except being hungry. "That's different," Lisa said. "Grandma was dealing with neighbors, not alien species." "Is it really that different?" Jake asked. He took another bite of his cookie. "These aliens, do they eat?" "Of course they eat." "Do they have families? Things they care about?" "Yes. But then they're not that different from us. Maybe they just need someone to remind them that they have more in common than they think." Amy had stopped playing with her toys and was listening to the conversation. "Mommy, why don't you make cookies for the aliens?" Lisa almost laughed, but then she stopped. The idea was crazy, but maybe crazy was what this situation needed. She had tried everything else. Formal negotiations, compromise proposals, historical precedents, economic incentives. Nothing had worked. "I don't think it's that simple, honey," she said, but her mind was already working. What if it was that simple? What if the solution was not more complex diplomatic strategies, but something more basic? You should try it, Jake said. What's the worst that could happen? They say no, and you're in the same position you're in now, but what if it works? They'll think I'm crazy. This is a major galactic peace summit, not a neighborhood barbecue. So, let them think you're crazy. Sometimes crazy is what breaks people out of old patterns. Lisa looked at her husband and daughter on the screen. Jake was right about one thing. She was already facing failure. The traditional approach had not worked. Maybe it was time to try something that had never been done before. Even if I wanted to try this, I don't have access to human food out here. The station has basic nutrition packets and alien food, but nothing like what you're talking about. Jake grinned. That's what supply ships are for. I bet if you made some calls, you could get a food shipment here pretty fast. Emergency diplomatic. Supplies or something. You want me to request an emergency shipment of cookies to a peace summit? Not just cookies. Real food. The kind that reminds people they're alive and have something worth fighting for besides territory. Lisa thought about the angry faces around the conference table that morning. War Prime Thexus, with his constant threats of violence. High Speaker, Velen with her cold superiority. The buzzing frustration of the Hive Node Prime. Trade Master Corvin with his endless focus on profit. Even Isolation Keeper Silthan, who seemed afraid of everyone and everything. What if they were all just scared? What if underneath all the posturing and demands, they were just beings trying to protect something they cared about? And what if the key to helping them see that was something as simple as sharing a meal? I would have to convince my aide to help me, Lisa said slowly. Lieutenant Commander Pete Johnson is a good man, but he's very by the book. He'll think I've lost my mind. Have you? Jake asked with a smile. Probably. But you know what? I'm tired of watching everything fall apart because everyone is too proud to try something different. Amy clapped her hands. Are you going to do it, Mommy? Lisa looked at her daughter's excited face and made her decision. I'm going to try. I don't know if it will work, but I'm going to try. She spent another 10 minutes talking to Jake and Amy about normal things. Amy's school project about Mars, Jake's work at the engineering firm, the new restaurant they wanted to try when she got home. It felt good to remember that there was a world beyond the failed peace talks. After she ended the call, Lisa sat in her chair and thought about what she was considering. It was probably career suicide. If this went badly, she would be remembered as the ambassador who tried to solve galactic conflict with Snacks. Her superiors would transfer her to some quiet post where she could not embarrass humanity again. But if it worked, if it actually worked, Lisa opened her personal files and started looking up emergency supply procedures. It was time to make some very unusual requests. Lisa Carter sat at the long metal table and watched everything fall apart. 3 weeks of talking had led to nothing. The alien ambassadors around her were angry, tired, and ready to give up. The peace talks that were supposed to end the war in the outer rim systems were dying right in front of her eyes. The space station Harmony 7 floated in neutral space between all the major powers. It was built for moments like this, when enemies needed to meet and try to make peace. The station had meeting rooms, living quarters, and everything needed for long talks. But right now, it felt more like a prison than a place of hope. War Prime Thexus of the Korthak Empire slammed his massive fist on the table. The sound rang through the room like a gunshot. His red skin was darker than usual, which Lisa had learned meant he was furious. The Korthak were warriors who settled disputes with battles, not words. Thexus had been patient for 3 weeks, but that patience was gone. This is useless, Thexus growled in his deep voice. We waste time while our enemies grow stronger. The Korthak do not beg for scraps of space. We take what we need. Across from him, High Speaker Velen of the Veltar Confederation raised her long, thin nose higher in the air. The Veltar looked like tall, elegant birds with pale blue skin and silver hair. They thought they were better than everyone else because their civilization was older than the others. Typical barbarian thinking, Velen said in her cold voice. The Veltar have ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, while your people were still hitting rocks together. We will not give up our rightful territories to accommodate your expansion. The Zephyrian representative, Hive Node Prime, buzzed with anger. The Zephyrians were insect-like creatures that shared one giant mind across their entire species. When one of them spoke, it was like millions of voices talking at once. The buzzing sound they made when upset could drive other species crazy. The collective remembers every slight, every broken promise, the Hive Node said. The border's drawn. After the last war gave us worlds we could not use, we will not accept the same mistakes again. Trademaster Corvin of the Drakmori clans laughed, but there was no humor in it. The Drakmori looked like walking rocks with gems for eyes. They cared about nothing except mining resources and making profits. Corvin's gem eyes glowed brighter when he was excited about money, but now they were dim with frustration. You all fight over empty space while the real wealth slips away, Corvin said. The asteroid fields in the disputed zones contain enough rare metals to make us all rich. But instead of mining them together, you want to draw lines on star maps. In the corner, Isolation Keeper Silthan of the Nexari Republic said nothing. The Nexari were pale, thin beings who avoided contact with other species. They only joined these talks because the war had pushed refugees toward their borders. Silthan's large, dark eyes watched everything, but revealed nothing. Lisa felt like the only adult in a room full of angry children. She was 42 years old and had spent most of her career trying to get different groups to work together. But this was her first major assignment representing humanity in galactic politics. The other species barely tolerated humans at these talks. To them, humanity was too new, too young, too small to matter. The truth was, they were probably right. Humans had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. The other species had been fighting wars and making treaties for thousands of years. Earth controlled maybe 20 star systems, while the Korthak Empire had over 300. The Veltar Confederation was even bigger, but humans were here because the war had started near human space. 3 major trade routes passed through the disputed systems. If the fighting continued, human colonies would be caught in the middle. Lisa's job was to help find peace, even if the others did not want her help. High Speaker Velen stood up from her chair. She was nearly 7 feet tall, and when she spread her arms, her flowing robes made her look like a giant bird preparing to fly. The Veltar have heard enough empty words, she announced. We have territories to govern and a civilization to maintain. We will not waste more time on these pointless discussions. War Prime Thaxus jumped to his feet as well. He was shorter than Velen, but twice as wide, with muscles that looked like they could crush steel. His hand moved to the ceremonial weapon at his side. The Korthak agree, he said. Warriors solve problems with action, not talk. If you want our space, you will have to take it from us. The Hive Node Prime buzzed louder, and Trademaster Corvin's gem eyes started to glow with anger. Even Isolation Keeper Silthan shifted in his chair, probably thinking about how to escape the station before violence broke out. Lisa watched her first major diplomatic mission collapse. She had studied every file, read every report, and prepared for months. but nothing had prepared her for how much these species hated each other. The war in the Outer Rim was just the latest chapter in conflicts that had been going on for centuries. The meeting room's lights seemed to get dimmer as the ambassadors prepared to leave. Through the large windows, Lisa could see the stars that marked the borders between the different powers. Somewhere out there, ships were fighting and people were dying while their leaders gave up on peace. Station Commander Velen, who was not related to the Veltar ambassador despite the similar name, had warned Lisa that most galactic peace talks failed. The different species were too proud, too set in their ways, too convinced that they were right and everyone else was wrong. Lisa had thought humans could make a difference. They were neutral, practical, and good at finding solutions that worked. For everyone. But as she watched the ambassadors file out of the room, she realized that maybe she had been wrong. Maybe some problems were too big for anyone to solve. The room grew quiet except for the hum of the station's life support systems. Lisa remained in her chair, staring at her notes and wondering what she would tell her superiors back on Earth. How do you explain that the future of galactic peace depends on getting 5 species to agree on something, and they cannot even agree on what color the sky should be? Outside the windows, the stars looked cold and distant. Somewhere among them, the war continued. The next morning, Lisa stood outside the main conference room and took a deep breath. Inside, the 5 alien ambassadors were gathering for what everyone expected to be the final session of the failed peace talks. She had spent most of the night making calls to Earth and pulling favors with supply coordinators. The emergency food shipment was already on its way, but it would not arrive for several hours. Lieutenant Commander Pete Johnson stood beside her, looking like he had not slept either. He was a tall, thin man with gray hair and the kind of serious expression that came from 20 years in the diplomatic corps. When Lisa had explained her plan to him at 5 in the morning, he had stared at her for a full minute without speaking. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Pete asked for the 3rd time that morning. "No," Lisa said honestly, "but I'm sure that what we've been doing isn't working." "Ambassador Carter, with all due respect, this could end your career. Mine too, for that matter." "Pete, if we don't try something different, there won't be careers to worry about. There will be a war that spreads across half the galaxy." Pete adjusted his uniform jacket and nodded slowly. "All right, but for the record, this is the craziest thing I've ever been part of." Lisa smiled. "Good. Maybe crazy is what we need." She walked into the conference room with Pete close behind. The alien ambassadors were already seated around the big table, but their body language told her everything she needed to know. War Prime Thexus sat with his arms crossed, looking like he was ready to fight someone. High Speaker Velen kept her nose in the air, as if the whole room smelled bad. The Hive Node Prime buzzed softly with annoyance. Trademaster Corvin's gem eyes were dim with boredom. Isolation Keeper Silthan looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Station Commander Valen, the moderator of the talks, looked tired. She had probably been writing her failure report, too. "Before we begin the final session," Lisa said, raising her voice to get everyone's attention, "I would like to make an announcement." War Prime Thexus made a sound that might have been laughter. "Let me guess. The humans have another pointless compromise to suggest?" "Not exactly," Lisa said. "I would like to invite all of you to my quarters this afternoon for an informal cultural exchange. I want to share something important about human civilization with you." The silence that followed was so complete that Lisa could hear the hum of the station's air recyclers. Then Trademaster Corvin spoke up. "A cultural exchange? What does human culture have to do with territorial boundaries? Everything, Lisa said. How can we draw borders between our peoples if we don't understand who those peoples really are? High Speaker Velen raised one pale eyebrow. Ambassador Carter, we are here to discuss serious matters of galactic importance, not to indulge in primitive social rituals. With respect, High Speaker, our current approach to these serious matters has failed completely. Perhaps it's time to try something different. The Hive Node Prime's buzzing grew louder. The collective does not understand the purpose of this request. What benefit could possibly come from observing human customs? Lisa had prepared for this question, but now that she was actually standing here, her carefully planned words seemed inadequate. How do you explain to beings who have been fighting for centuries that the answer might be as simple as sharing a meal? Because, she said finally, maybe the problem isn't that we disagree about borders. Maybe the problem is that we see each other as enemies instead of neighbors. War Prime Thexus slammed his hand on the table again. We are enemies. The Korthak have been at war with the Veltar for 300 years. And how has that worked out for you? Lisa asked. 300 years of fighting, and what do you have to show for it? Destroyed worlds, dead soldiers, and the same problems you started with. The room fell quiet again. Lisa could see that her words had hit home, even if the ambassadors did not want to admit it. Look, she continued, I'm not asking you to sign treaties or make promises. I'm asking you to spend a few hours learning something about humans. If it's a waste of time, you can leave and go back to your ships. But if there's even a small chance that it might help, isn't it worth trying? Isolation Keeper Silthan spoke, for the first time that morning. His voice was soft and careful. What exactly would this cultural exchange involve? Food, Lisa said simply. I want to share human food with you. The silence this time was different. It was not the angry silence of before, but the confused silence of beings trying to understand something completely unexpected. Food, High Speaker Velen repeated. You want to interrupt peace negotiations to discuss nutrition? Not discuss it. Share it. Eat it together. Trademaster Corvin's gem eyes flickered. Is this some kind of human ritual? A religious ceremony? In a way, yes. Humans believe that when you share food with someone, you share part of yourself. It's how we build trust and friendship. War Prime Thexus looked suspicious. Is this food some kind of drug? A way to make us weak or compliant? Lisa almost smiled. No, War Prime, it's just food. Delicious food that my people have been making for thousands of years. She could see the aliens exchanging glances, trying to figure out what kind of trap this might be. But she could also see something else. Curiosity. These beings had been stuck on this station for 3 weeks, eating bland nutrition packets and growing more frustrated every day. The idea of something different, even something as simple as a good meal, was starting to appeal to them. The Zephyrian collective is intrigued, the Hive Node Prime admitted. We have observed that humans place great importance on food preparation and consumption. We do not understand why, but we are curious. That was the opening Lisa had been hoping for. Then come and find out. All of you. What do you have to lose? High Speaker Velen looked around the table. This is highly irregular. Peace summits do not involve dinner parties. Maybe that's why they keep failing, Lisa said. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Finally, Trademaster Corvin spoke up. The Drakmori are always interested in new experiences, especially if they might lead to profitable opportunities. We will attend. One by one, the others agreed. War Prime Thexus said he would come, but only to prove that human customs were as weak as human military forces. High Speaker Valen agreed because she was curious about the diplomatic implications. The Hive Node Prime wanted to study human social behaviors. Even Isolation Keeper Silton nodded his agreement, though he looked terrified. "Excellent," Lisa said, trying to keep the relief out of her voice. "My quarters at 1800 hours, and please come hungry." As the ambassadors filed out of the room, Pete moved closer to Lisa. "The supply ship had better get here on time," he said quietly. "It will," Lisa said, hoping she was right. "And Pete? You might want to requisition some extra stomach medication from the medical bay. I have a feeling this is going to be a very interesting evening." Through the conference room windows, Lisa could see a small transport ship approaching the station. Her emergency food shipment was arriving right on schedule. In a few hours, she would either save the peace talks or destroy her career. Maybe both. Lisa's quarters had been completely transformed. What had been a simple living space that morning was now filled with tables covered in white cloths. The emergency food shipment had arrived just 2 hours before the dinner, and Lisa and Pete had worked frantically to set everything up. The smell was incredible. Rich, complex aromas filled the air in layers. There was the warm scent of fresh bread, the spicy smell of Indian curry, the smoky aroma of barbecued meat, and dozens of other scents that mixed together into something that made Lisa's mouth water, even though she had been around it all afternoon. Pete stood near the door, adjusting his uniform for the 10th time. "I still can't believe we pulled this together so fast," he said. Lisa looked around the room one more time. Every table was covered with food from different human cultures. There were Italian pasta dishes with thick red sauce and melted cheese, Mexican tacos with seasoned meat and fresh vegetables, Japanese sushi arranged on wooden boards, Chinese stir-fry with bright vegetables and savory sauces, Indian curry that filled the air with warm spices, French pastries that looked like small works of art, Southern barbecue with meat so tender it fell off the bone, Greek salads with olive oil and feta cheese, Thai soup that steamed with herbs and spices, and in the center of it all, a chocolate cake that Jake had insisted she include. "Trust me," he had said during their quick call that afternoon. "Chocolate is humanity's secret weapon." The door chimed, and Lisa took a deep breath. "Here we go," she said. The first to arrive was Trademaster Corvin. The Drakmori looked around the room with his gem eyes glowing brighter than Lisa had ever seen them. He moved from table to table, studying the food like he was examining precious metals. "Fascinating," he said in his gravelly voice. "The variety is remarkable. How many different preparation methods are represented here?" "Dozens," Lisa said. "Human food comes from hundreds of different cultures on our home world. Each region developed its own techniques over thousands of years." "The resource efficiency must be terrible," Corvin said, but he sounded impressed rather than critical. War Prime Thexus arrived next, followed by 2 Korthak guards who looked around the room suspiciously. Thexus himself seemed confused by what he was seeing. "This is not what I expected," he admitted. "What did you expect?" Lisa asked. "Military rations, protein paste, efficiency nutrients." He gestured at the elaborate spread. "This is excessive." "It's celebration," Lisa said. "Food isn't just fuel for humans, it's art, culture, love, and community all mixed together. High Speaker Velen entered with her usual dignified bearing. But Lisa could see her pale blue nostrils flaring as she took in the scents. The Veltar tried to look unimpressed, but her eyes kept moving to the more elaborate dishes. "The presentation is adequate," Velen said carefully, "though I question the practical purpose of such decoration." The Hive Node Prime arrived in a buzzing cloud of excitement. The Zephyrian moved quickly from table to table, its insect-like antennae twitching as it processed the different smells. "The collective has never encountered such aromatic complexity," it said. "Our nutrition is efficient but uniform. This is chaotic." "Good chaos," Lisa said. "The kind that makes life interesting." Isolation Keeper Silthan slipped in last, looking like he wanted to hide behind the door. The pale Nexari kept to the edges of the room, but Lisa noticed that his large, dark eyes were taking in every detail. "Thank you all for coming," Lisa said when everyone had arrived. "Before we begin, let me explain a few things about human food culture." She moved to the nearest table, where Pete was standing ready with plates and utensils. "For humans, sharing food is one of the most important social activities we have. It's how we show friendship, build trust, and celebrate community. When we invite someone to eat with us, we're saying that we care about them." War Prime Thexus looked skeptical. "Among the Korthak, warriors eat together after battle to honor the fallen. It is a serious ritual." "This is serious too," Lisa said, "just in a different way." She picked up a plate and began serving herself small portions from different dishes. "The rule is simple. Try whatever interests you, but start small. Human food can be very different from what you're used to." The aliens watched as she took a bite of pasta, chewed thoughtfully, and smiled. "Safe and delicious," she announced. Pete moved forward with plates for the ambassadors. For a moment, no one moved. Then Trademaster Corvin stepped forward. "The Drakmori have always been willing to take calculated risks," he said, accepting a plate. "If this kills me, at least it will be an interesting death." That broke the tension, and the others began to approach the tables. Lisa watched carefully as each alien encountered human food for the first time. War Prime Thexus examined a piece of barbecued rib like it might explode. "What animal is this from?" he asked. "Pig," Lisa said. "It's been slow-cooked for hours in a special sauce." Thexus took a cautious bite. His red eyes widened in surprise. "This is not unpleasant. The flavor is complex. How many ingredients are in this sauce?" "About 15 different spices and seasonings," Pete said. "It's a recipe from the southern regions of North America." High Speaker Velen had selected a small portion of French cheese and was examining it with scientific precision. "The texture is unusual. How is this produced?" "It's aged milk from earth cows," Lisa explained. "The aging process creates the flavors and texture." Velen took a tiny bite and paused. For a moment, her usual cold expression softened. "This is surprisingly sophisticated. The chemical complexity rivals our finest Veltar delicacies." The Hive Node Prime had loaded its plate with small samples of everything. It was eating methodically, pausing after each bite to process the experience. "The collective is overwhelmed by the sensory input," it said. "Each item produces completely different neural responses. How do humans choose what to consume?" "Usually by what tastes good to us," Lisa said, "but also by tradition, mood, and what's available." Isolation Keeper Silthan had barely touched his food, but Lisa noticed that he kept returning to the bread. "This is similar to something my people make," he said quietly. but the flavor is richer. That's because it's made with eggs and butter, Lisa explained. It makes the bread softer and more flavorful. As the evening progressed, something remarkable began to happen. The aliens started to relax. War Prime Thexus discovered that he loved spicy food and kept returning to the Mexican dishes. High Speaker Velen became fascinated by the artistry of the French pastries. Trademaster Corvin calculated the trade value of various spices and began asking detailed questions about Earth's agricultural systems. The Hive Node Prime made an incredible discovery. For the first time in its existence, it was experiencing individual taste sensations rather than the collective responses of the hive mind. "This is unprecedented," it kept saying. "The collective shares all experiences, but taste seems to be personal." Even Silthan began to open up, comparing human preservation techniques to ancient Nexari methods for storing food during their planet's long winters. "You know," War Prime Thexus said as he finished his third serving of barbecue, "Korthak, warriors have a tradition called feast battles. After a great victory, the survivors gather to eat and tell stories of those who fell. The food honors both the living and the dead." "That sounds beautiful," Lisa said. "I had not thought of it as beautiful before," Thexus admitted. "But watching you prepare and share this food, perhaps there is beauty in the ritual itself, not just the victory it celebrates." High Speaker Velen dabbed at her mouth with a napkin. "The Veltar have formal dining ceremonies that can last for days, but they are about status and protocol, not about this." "What is this?" Lisa asked. Valen paused, searching for words. "Warmth. Community. The sense that we are all just beings who need food and companionship." Trademaster Corvin looked up from calculating the profit potential of importing human chocolate to Drakmori space. "I have been thinking about the disputed asteroid fields," he said. "What if instead of fighting over mining rights, we established joint agricultural stations? The minerals could support hydroponic farming systems." Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. This was the first time any of them had suggested cooperation instead of competition. "That's actually a brilliant idea," she said carefully. The evening was working. For the first time in 3 weeks, the ambassadors were talking to each other instead of at each other, and it had all started with food. As the evening continued, Lisa watched the transformation happen right before her eyes. The angry, suspicious aliens who had entered her quarters were slowly becoming something else. They were becoming people who happened to be enjoying a good meal together. War Prime Thexus had discovered the chocolate cake. He stared at the slice on his plate like it was some kind of miracle. "What sorcery is this?" he asked, taking another bite. "Just cocoa, sugar, flour, and eggs," Lisa said, smiling. "But the way they're combined makes all the difference. On Korthak Prime, our victory feasts include battle bread," Thexus said, his voice softer than Lisa had ever heard it. "It is hard. Practical food meant to fuel warriors. But this," he gestured at the cake, "this serves no practical purpose except to bring joy." "Sometimes joy is the most practical thing of all," Lisa said. Thexus nodded slowly. "Among my people, we have a saying. A warrior who forgets joy becomes a machine of death." I had forgotten that until now. High Speaker Velen had moved on to the Indian curry, and her usual cold composure was completely gone. She was actually sweating slightly from the spices, but she kept eating. "This heat sensation is remarkable," she said. "It is painful and pleasant at the same time." "That's exactly right," Pete said. Spicy food creates a kind of controlled discomfort that many humans find addictive. The Veltar prize control above all else, Velen said. Our food is perfectly balanced, nutritionally optimal, and completely predictable. But this chaos... She took another bite of curry. There is something liberating about not knowing exactly what each bite will bring. The Hive Node Prime was having an even more profound experience. It had been standing still for several minutes, its antennae quivering as it processed something completely new. The collective has never experienced individual sensation before, it said finally. When one of us tastes something, we all taste it. But this food creates responses that are mine alone. I am tasting as myself, not as part of the whole. That must be frightening, Lisa said gently. Terrifying, the Hive Node agreed, and wonderful. For the first time in my existence, I am having thoughts that belong only to me. Is this what you call individuality? It's one part of it, Lisa said. The ability to have your own experiences, your own preferences, your own perspective on things. I like the sweet foods more than the spicy ones, the Hive Node said with something like wonder. That preference is mine alone. The collective would choose based on nutritional efficiency, but I choose based on pleasure. Trademaster Corvin had been quiet for a while, but Lisa could see his gem eyes glowing brighter as he worked through some complex calculations. Finally, he looked up from his plate. I have been thinking about efficiency all wrong, he said. The Drakmori measure value by how much profit we can extract from resources. But this meal, the value is not in the individual ingredients. It is in the combination, the preparation, the sharing. What do you mean? Lisa asked. These ingredients are common: grain, vegetables, meat, spices. Any species could acquire them. But the knowledge of how to combine them, the time spent preparing them, the act of sharing them, that creates value that cannot be measured in standard economic terms. He gestured around the room. We have been fighting over who gets to mine the asteroid fields in the disputed zones. But what if the real value is not in taking resources out, but in putting something back, building something together? Isolation Keeper Silthan had been listening to the conversation while slowly working his way through a piece of bread with honey. The Nexari learned long ago that cooperation leads to survival, he said quietly. During the Great Winter on our homeworld, individual families could not gather enough resources to survive. But when we worked together, shared what we had, we all lived through the cold years. Why did your people become isolationists then? Lisa asked gently. Silthan was quiet for a long moment. Because the other species did not understand cooperation the way we did. They saw our willingness to share as weakness. They took what we offered and gave nothing back. So we learned to trust only ourselves. But that's not cooperation, High Speaker Velen said. That's exploitation. Yes, Silthan agreed. But how do you tell the difference before it is too late? War Prime Thexus looked up from his cake. By starting small. By sharing something that costs little but means much. Like this meal. Lisa felt goosebumps on her arms. These beings who had been ready to go to war that morning were now talking about cooperation and trust. And it had all started with food. The Hive Node Prime moved closer to the group. The collective has always believed that other species were too chaotic to work with. Too unpredictable, too individual. But watching you all discover new flavors, express personal preferences, Perhaps chaos is not the enemy of cooperation. Perhaps it is the source of creativity. The Zephyrians could manage agricultural projects more efficiently than any single species, Trademaster Corvin said suddenly. Your collective intelligence could coordinate complex farming operations across multiple star systems. And the Drakmori have the mining expertise to extract the minerals needed for those operations, the Hive Node replied. The collective is interested in this possibility. High Speaker Velen set down her fork and looked around the group. The Veltar have always believed that our ancient wisdom made us superior to younger species, but tonight I have learned new things, tasted new flavors, had thoughts I have never had before. She paused. Perhaps wisdom is not about knowing everything already. Perhaps it is about being willing to learn new things. The Korthak respect strength above all else, War Prime Thexis said. But I am beginning to think that the greatest strength might be the willingness to lower your weapon and share a meal with your enemy. Lisa looked around the room at the 5 ambassadors. Their plates were mostly empty now, and their body language was completely different from what it had been that morning. War Prime Thexis was leaning back in his chair, relaxed for the first time since Lisa had met him. High Speaker Velen's stiff posture had softened. The Hive Node Prime was no longer buzzing with agitation. Trademaster Corvin's gem eyes were bright with excitement about new possibilities. Even Isolation Keeper Silthan was sitting closer to the group instead of hiding in the corner. You know, Lisa said carefully, we still have the same territorial disputes we had this morning, the same resource conflicts, the same historical grievances. But we also have something we did not have this morning, Silthan said. What's that? Pete asked. The knowledge that we are not so different after all. High Speaker Velen said, we all eat. We all need resources to survive. We all want to protect our people and our way of life. And now we know that we can sit in the same room without killing each other, War Prime Thexis added with what might have been a smile. The collective has computed 17 different scenarios for joint agricultural development of the disputed systems, the Hive Node Prime announced. All of them produce better outcomes than continued conflict. Trademaster Corvin's gem eyes sparkled. If we are going to discuss business, perhaps we should do it over more of that chocolate cake. Lisa looked at Pete, who was grinning despite his earlier concerns. They had done it. They had actually done it. The peace talks were not dead after all. I think, Lisa said, we should plan to meet again tomorrow, in the conference room this time. But maybe we could start each session with coffee and pastries. The collective approves of this proposal, the Hive Node Prime said. As do the Korthak. War Prime Thexis agreed. One by one, all 5 ambassadors agreed. They would try again. They would try to build peace instead of planning for war. And it had all started with sharing a meal.